Tonight we continue our study then in the 13th chapter of the book of Acts. So we're getting down now, or we are in the first missionary journey of Paul. Now, as we look at this, we take this timeline, and again, I don't want you to try to memorize this timeline, but it gives you an idea of where we are. Now, remember last week we talked about in chapters 11 and 12, 44 A.D. Now, we know that because history tells us that, some of the records that have been dug up. And so now then Paul is getting ready to go out on his journey there in about 47 A.D. And he would have been converted back there at about 40 A.D. And so we're starting down the line now of his life there. As we take a look at Paul, let's again go back through the journey that he's had so far. We picked him up in Jerusalem, and then where did he go from Jerusalem? All right, he went up to Damascus then, if this works. Oh, I've got some of these other cities up here I got to put it. Went up to Damascus, then where? Arabia, then where? Back to Damascus, down to Jerusalem. By the way, hold it. How long was he up there in Damascus from the time he left Jerusalem till the time he got back? 3 years. He comes down to Jerusalem. How long is he there before he's sent away? 15 days. They send him away, and where does he go? Goes to Caesarea. Then from Caesarea, goes up to Tarsus. All right, from Tarsus, Barnabas goes and picks him up. Where does he go? Goes down to Antioch. How long were they at Antioch? They're going to be down there 1 year teaching. Now, then there's going to be a famine there, and so they take the money and go where? Down to Judea. And what was the last city they visited in Judea? Jerusalem. Then they went back up to Antioch. All right, now that's what you'd say his journey before he started off on his regular journey then. Again, let's look at this about how to draw a map. I'm not going to ask you to do it tonight, but just keep in mind that curvature in there. I want you to be able to put it in. What are those two lakes? All right, Galilee and the Dead Sea, the river, the Jordan River, the red dot, Jerusalem. How many miles from the top of Dead Sea? 18 miles over there. Then Canaan, Palestine, and Israel is what it's called. Which name is the oldest? Canaan. That's what it was called all the way up through really New Testament times. And then Palestine came in after the Jews were destroyed in 135 A.D. And that name was taken from what nation? The Philistines, that's right. And then we come with the nation of Israel. And so Israel then today is when would that have come into existence? All right, in 1948, the nation of Israel is over there. So then you can see the Israelis and the Palestinians. And so the Palestinians would be the people who lived in the land of Canaan or Palestine before they went over in 1948 then. Then we get a picture here of how to draw that Mediterranean Sea. Put that little dot up there. What's that little circle out there? Okay, that's going to be Cyprus. This is called three things: the sea, the Great Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea then. That's there. We reduce that and take that little land of Palestine and put it over there right down in that little chunk. Then if you go up that way, you go into Asia. If you go down this way, you go into Egypt then. And here is where Paul's going to have his first missionary journey then. It's going to be a short one going up in that direction there. Now, we again here have Asia. We have Egypt down there. And all of our cities are put around there. Paul, the last time, left Antioch, and he went Antioch down to Cyprus. And from Cyprus then, he's going to go up in this area. Then he will come back again. Should have been another one. Yeah, that one shouldn't be on this one. The computer does that sometimes. Okay, we got this map here. And so as you look at it, here is Asia and Galatia. Now this will be where Paul has his second missionary journey. It'll be over in that area where he has that. But this is going to be the territory of the first missionary journey. He's trying to get us familiarized with the map and where we are in all of this thing here. All right, as we look at this, well, how do you like that? It takes part of words and puts them in and part not. Boy. Okay, if we draw that yellow line right down there, over on the right, that country over there is Asia. The country over at the left is Europe then. That's there. Here is where Paul's missionary journey, first missionary journey, then is going to be. Up in here today, that country is called Turkey, and this country over, boo, 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 bye-bye, shouldn't have done that, is called the Middle East then, that is over there. Some of these days I'm going to give up. Now, as we take this map here, it's spread out. I'm going to cut off the left side. We'll just blow up the right side because that's where we're going to be dealing now with the first missionary journey that he has. So now he's going to take off from what city? All right, from Antioch, there it is, where he takes off. He went down to what town? Down to Seleucia. All he did when he got down to Seleucia is got on a boat. So he gets on a boat, he goes over to Salamis, and then he goes on through the island of Cyprus and preaching and so forth, but it doesn't tell us what he's doing. He comes over to Paphos. Now when he gets over to Paphos, that very interesting thing happened. What was the proconsul's name? Sergius Paulus was over there, and this is where he struck the sorcerer blind, and from this time on, why Saul is going to be known as Paul. Okay, now, as we start out then tonight in our lesson, we're down here now to verse 13, chapter 13 and verse 13. Now, Paul and his company, who would be in his company? Paul and Barnabas and John Mark are going to be there. Now, Paul and his company sailed from Paphos and came to Perga in Pamphylia. All right, we come up here to Perga. There you can see the country is Pamphylia, but the city itself is Perga. Now, when they get up there, it said, and John departed from them and returned to Jerusalem. Now, why would he go to Jerusalem rather than back at Antioch? That's his home. Remember where they picked him up? They picked him up down at Jerusalem and took him up there with them and then started out. So now he's leaving and going back home. Now here's an interesting thing. This doesn't tell us anything about the reason why he went back home. What it says is in verse 14, and they passing through from Perga came to Antioch in Pisidia. So here then we have, this thing is crazy. Okay, let me do something here. See if I can. Okay, they're going to go now from Perga up to Antioch. Now they left Antioch, but that's Antioch of Syria, and now then they're going up to Antioch of Pisidia. All right, now that land that goes up through there is a rather dangerous piece of land. And for some reason, John Mark was a coward. That's about the nicest thing that I can say. I don't know what he did. We have to guess at what he did. But here's what I'll tell you. A little bit later on, when they go on this journey and they get back, they go back down to Jerusalem, and guess what Barnabas does? He picks up John Mark again. And then when they get ready to go on the second missionary journey, why, they're going to go, and Barnabas says, well, I want to take John Mark, and Paul says no. And Barnabas said yes. And they got in a real hot argument, and Paul said he would not go if John Mark was going to go. And so they split company. Barnabas took his cousin John, and Paul took another man and went another way. So they even had a falling out over this guy, and the reason is because he didn't go with them on the first journey. That's the reason Paul said, I don't want him along. In other words, he's a hindrance. There's something about him. And so the guess is that as you're walking in that country there, there's a lot of mountainous countries, and you go around, and there's just trails in there, and thieves would hide back in the crevices and jump out, and it was a dangerous road, a dangerous area. And the guess is he got up there, and he saw how dangerous it was going up through there, and so he got scared, and he went back home to Mama. And so Paul didn't like it at all. But we'll deal with it as we get on down there. So for some reason, John Mark left, and Paul was really upset and mad about it. All right, now they go up to Antioch of Pisidia. All right, when they get up to Antioch of Pisidia, it says here in verse 14, and passing through Perga, they came to Antioch of Pisidia, and they went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and sat down. And after the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue said unto them, saying, Brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say on. Now, as you look at this, why after Sunday night, we get through with our service, and we have some visitors back there, and I say, Brethren, if you have any words that you want to say, why, now's the time to speak. Come on up. In other words, I wouldn't say that to anybody unless they had made known to me when they came in that they'd like to say something, would you? So Paul and Barnabas comes in, you know, and brethren, could we speak, and so forth, and you're circumcised, and yes, and we're Jews, and so forth, and okay. So we have a certain ritual we go through, and here it is, the reading of the law and the prophets. So they read the law, they read the prophets then, and then they said, now, brethren, if you have anything to say, why, we'll listen to you now. So now here is a Jew, Paul, that's going to get up and speak to Jews that are in the synagogue. And everything should be great, shouldn't it? Except you and I know what Paul is going to do. Now, before we go any farther, you will be given passages like this when you're talking to somebody about the Sabbath day. And they say, well, Christians kept the Sabbath day, you see, up until 325 A.D., and they claim that Constantine changed the Sabbath to Sunday, and they go on like this. And Christians kept the Sabbath day. What about Paul? See, Paul practiced the Sabbath day. He went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day. But what is Paul going into that synagogue for? What's his purpose? What's he getting ready to do? He's getting ready to preach to these people and tell them they're wrong. He's getting ready to preach to them and try to convert them out of their Judaism to becoming a Christian. So you can't use this to say Paul is keeping the Sabbath. Now, why would he go into the synagogue? That's where Jews are. Who are the people that are most receptive to the Bible teaching? The Jews. And whatever he reads them in the Old Testament, will they believe it? Without question. No argumentation whatsoever. So his best audience is in the synagogues. Now, when is it that he will have any problem? Whether in the first century times, remember that they had two things. They preached that the Christ would suffer, he would die, and they gave Old Testament prophecy for that. Did that ever cause any problem? No, that didn't cause problems. People would look and say, boy, I didn't know that, but there it is. That's what Isaiah said. Wow. Then the next thing that he preached is what caused problems, and what was the next thing? Jesus is the Christ. That then is when the problems came. So now, Paul is getting ready to preach to them here, so he stands up to preach to these Jews. Now, he knows that in a little while, he's getting ready to tell them, going to take their scriptures and tell them that they're wrong. But what is the necessary thing for him to do before he gets into the subject of them being wrong? What if he just gets up and says, brethren, I'm here to tell you people that you're all wrong. And you need to change. Just being like this. Why, then that's not going to work. All right, now what he's going to do is he's going to lay the groundwork and let them know, I am a Jew. I believe in the Old Testament. I believe in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I believe everything that our forefathers said. I am a son of those forefathers. And I'm going to use them as my authority, and I'm going to let you know that I don't reject being a Jew. I don't reject the Old Testament. I accept all of this. But if you do accept this, it leads you one step farther than where you people have gone. See? It's going to lead you to Jesus Christ. So he's going to lay the foundation. Do you remember another man that got up and he preached a long sermon, and it was just a history of the Old Testament to lay the foundation of I am a child of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And who was that? He just gave that long history before he got down to Jesus. Stephen, what chapter? Chapter 7. All right, he gave that. Now, Paul's going to take the same approach, which is a very wise approach that's here. Wouldn't it be good if somebody was going to show us that you don't have to be baptized to be saved? And if they got up, rather than just saying that, wouldn't it carry more impact with you if they got up and said, now, Jesus Christ established his church in Acts 2, and here we have the New Testament, the 27 books, and I believe every one of them. I believe what God said in every one of them. I believe they're verbally inspired, like Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 2. And wouldn't that carry a lot of weight with you as they're talking like this? You say, okay, here's a person that's not some wild-eyed liberal out here. Here's a guy that thinks just like I do. And then he gets down in about 30 minutes and says, now I want to show you where you don't have to be baptized. Well, that'll catch your attention, won't it? But he's laid the foundation now that he believes in the Bible. So, you're going to listen to him. You're going to listen to him, and you're going to expect him to read it out of the Bible, aren't you? You're going to say, well, maybe we better, study this. That's what he's going to do. He's going to lay the foundation by going through the Old Testament Scriptures. So he starts out. He stood up and he beckoned with his hands. This seems to be what Paul always did. It's a situation he did. He would hold up his hands and get ready. Men of Israel, and ye that fear God, hearken. Now, who would be these men who fear God, but they're not men of Israel? Who? No. What? I can't hear you. Okay, yeah, you remember those threshold Jews we talked about? Those Jews that feared God, that wanted to obey God, but they didn't go ahead and adopt the Jewish religion, you see. Now, Dave, as you say, proselytes, it could be that they could be classified in there because a proselyte was not a Jew, were they? But a proselyte was a Jew, weren't they? In other words, they had adopted the Jewish religion by being circumcised, and so then they were recognized as Jews, you see, at that time. So these would be those doorstep, threshold Gentiles. These would be guys like Cornelius that's there. They fear God. Now, he said, the God of this people Israel. I'm going to stop right here, just make a point. Which God is it that Paul's going to preach? The God of Israel. I'm not here to tell you about another God. I'm not here to tell you about Confucius. I'm not here to tell you about Baal or Asherah. The God of this people, that's the God I'm going to be talking about. The God of this people, Israel, chose our fathers. Why would he put our fathers in there? I'm part of you, see? These men are my fathers also. Here, chose our fathers and exalted the people when they sojourned in the land of Egypt with a high arm, that means with a mighty arm, power, led he them forth out of it. So, with that quick statement, he's putting his stamp of approval upon everything Moses did when God sent Moses down to lead the children of Israel out of Egypt, the 10 Commandments, dividing of the Red Sea, the 40 years of going through the wilderness. Our God did this. And so he's setting the stage. I believe in this God. 18. And for about the time of 40 years, as a nursing father, bare he them in the wilderness. So he took these Jews out, he roamed them around for 40 years, and he took care of them just like a nursing father would. A caring father would his children. And 19, and when he had destroyed 7 nations in the land of Canaan, he gave them their land for an inheritance. So when he destroyed these 7 nations of Canaan, so now then you're down at Joshua. How Joshua would send the people out, and they'd go to war, and they would conquer the Canaanites and so forth. And our God did all of that. He gave us the land of Canaan in here. And it says, and he gave them their land for an inheritance for about 450 years. So after he brought the Israelites into the land of Canaan, he let them stay there for about 450 years. So that would take you way down through a long period of time, judges and kings and so forth. Verse 20, and after these things he gave them judges until Samuel the prophet. So Samuel is going to be the last judge that they have. Samuel is a judge and a prophet. And so God then gave them judges. And so with one sentence, he covers the whole book of Judges. But what's his point? His point is, I believe everything that you read in the book of Judges. I believe everything you read in the book of 1st and 2nd Samuel. It was God who did this then. So he's putting his stamp of approval, showing these people, I'm preaching the same God that you believe in. And in 21, and afterwards they asked for a king, and God gave unto them Saul the son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, for the space of 40 years. So our forefathers, they asked for a king. God gave them a king. He gave them Saul, and Saul was there reigning for 40 years. Why didn't he take time to talk about the bad things Saul did and how Saul and David fought this thing out, and Saul tried to kill David, and David had to run out in the mountains, and in other words, there it is, 25 chapters of the Old Testament taken up. And why didn't he give that, see? His purpose is not to educate. They know all these stories. His purpose is to put his approval on it. This is the God that I'm telling you about, see? So you know we're on the same chapter. We're on the same wavelength. All right, 22. And when he had removed him, he raised up David to be their king, to whom he also bare witness and said, I have found David the son of Jesse, a man after my heart, who shall do all my will. Now, when he gets to David, what would go through a Jewish heart? Who's the greatest man, from a Jewish viewpoint, who's the greatest man that ever lived? Abraham. He is our father. All right, as you move on down, who would be next? Who? Moses. He is our lawgiver. Then you come down, who would be next? David. He is our king. He's the one that established our nation and gave our nation a government. Those 3 men, they just stand head and shoulders above all of the hundreds of other people that you find. So when you get down to David, why, that's a sweet word. David. Here, you believe in David, you're on the right track. Then he goes ahead and he said, God said that he's a man after his own heart and so forth, and to do his will. And then 23, of this man's seed hath God, according to promise, brought unto Israel a Savior. Now, when he gets to David, he doesn't go any farther. he's ready now to make his jump. He's going to make his jump right on down now and hit them right there in the face with this argument that he's going to give. Let's look at what he's done so far here. He chose out here and he says, now, God chose our fathers. And then he said, he gave them there 400 years. They were down there in Egypt. Then they came out, and then we had 40 years of this. Then we had 450 years in Canaan. And then God gave us judges. And then God gave us kings. And he started out with Saul. And then God gave us David. Now, after he's gone this far, what has he established in his sermon? You and I are on the same wavelength. See? We believe in the same Bible. We believe in the same God. We believe in the same forefathers. We believe in the same scriptures. We are together. So when you get down to David, that now has been established. So now at the word David, the next thing he does is he jumps right on over to Jesus. He said, now from this man's seed, that is David, from David's seed in here, he gave us a Savior, Jesus. Now this is where problems will arise, isn't it? All right, now, to kind of look at the psychology of this thing, in order to temper it a little bit, what's the next thing he mentions just immediately after he mentions Jesus? John the Baptist. So we put John up there. So he backs up to John. Why is he going to back up to John? What did the Jews think about John? He was a hero. John the Baptist was a hero. What was it that all Jerusalem and all Judea did? Went down to be baptized of him. Now, to kind of do us, help us a little bit when I keep asking you some of those stupid questions. That little red dot, Jerusalem, how far was that little red dot from the top of the Dead Sea? 18 miles. What river ran into the Dead Sea? The Jordan River. Right there is where John was baptizing. Right there in the Jordan River, where it came down, right in that area there. Now, all of Jerusalem and all of Judea, all of those people walked 18 miles down there to listen to John and to be baptized of him. Now, this wasn't just a walk in the park. You know what kind of road that was? Just a real windy road going steeply downhill. Jerusalem is 2,600 feet above sea level. How far is the Dead Sea? 1,100 and some feet. So 2,600 and something, and then 1,100, about 1,200 feet from there. So you got 3,800 foot drop in 18 miles. Just going down. And this is a road of cliffs and hardships, and this is a road where Jesus used the parable of the Good Samaritan, and the guy jumped out, and he killed, or he wounded this guy, and the Samaritan came along and helped him. This is a dangerous road. I'm just saying this because Jews respected John the Baptist. Now, they respected John the Baptist because he lived what he preached. He was a very austere man. He wasn't preaching for the money. He didn't put on the airs like the scribes and the Pharisees. They looked at him. They saw he's a man that lives what he preaches. He's preaching righteousness there, and he was held in high esteem. Why was his life cut off so suddenly before Jews turned against him? Remember what happened to him? He preached against Herod and told him, you don't have a right to your wife, see? And so he got his head cut off. So he's held in high esteem in there. So he immediately goes, as soon as he says, Jesus, John. See? Then he put some buffer in there that's right there. Jesus, when John had first preached before his coming, the baptism of repentance to all the people of Israel. And as John was fulfilling his course, John said, "What do you suppose I am? I'm not he." Now the people were thinking that John the Baptist was probably the Messiah that was coming. There was what would you call it, a spirit of Messiahism at that time. People looking for the Messiah. They took the Scriptures, they saw that the time was ripe for the Messiah. And they thought the Messiah was coming. And here's John the Baptist, this man that stands head and shoulders above all other Jews there. And are you the Messiah? And John said, "No, I'm not the Messiah." And then John said, "But behold, there cometh one after me, the shoes of whose feet I am not worthy to unloose." Now, as these Jews would look at John, there was no man that they had ever known that had the character of John the Baptist. He was without fault. He was the only man who ever preached that could go out in the wilderness, and if you want to hear me preach, you come to me. What would happen to me if I went up here to Cascade Mountain somewhere and said, "Okay, Washington, if you want to hear me preach, you're going to come up here and sit on some rocks"? What would I be preaching to? See? But John could do that. John was highly respected there. These people respect him. And now then, he's telling them that there's one coming after him that's so much better than he is. He said, "I'm not even worthy to bend down and untie a shoelace that's on his shoe." Paul said, "Brethren, children of the stock of Abraham." Why does he do that? He's getting ready now to come to this conclusion. Why does he say, "Brethren, children of the stock of Abraham"? He's driving that home. See? Driving home. I'm not telling you something strange. I'm right with you right here. This is the God of Abraham. He said, "And those among you that fear God," there's the God-fearers, "to us is the word of this salvation sent." You and I have an opportunity nobody else has had. We have the word of this salvation. "For they that dwell in Jerusalem and their rulers, because they knew him not, nor the voices of the prophets which are read every Sabbath, fulfill them by condemning him. And though they found no cause of death in him, yet asked they of Pilate that he should be slain." So now he's getting right down into the sermon that's here. As we look at this sermon here that he's going to be preaching, remember the sermon that Peter preached back in Acts 2? What were the points? See, he's a man approved of God. You killed him. God raised him. God exalted him. And then they said, "Men and brethren, what shall we do?" And then he told them about remission of sins. Now there's what Peter preached. What is it we've said? Every sermon was built on this. Just turns it around just a little bit in here. Okay, now as we look at this, we can begin to see that all these things fall in place in here. Now he says, because the Jews did not understand the prophets. They even though the prophets had prophesied, they didn't understand him. The rulers didn't understand him. They fulfilled the prophecies by condemning Jesus. And then they brought him to Pilate. And then Pilate had him put to death. And when they had fulfilled all things that were written of him, you could go to various places, couldn't you? The Psalms and Isaiah 53 and so forth. And when they'd fulfilled all these things that were written of him in here, they took him down from the tree and laid him in a tomb. So our forefathers killed him. They fulfilled the prophets. Now, as we look at this in here, we can begin to see in here that he's really making this point. He's a man approved of God. What was it John the Baptist said about him? And nobody would argue with John the Baptist. What kind of man is he? He's so great, I'm not even worthy to untie a shoestring. You killed him. Now, back in Peter's time, Peter back there was preaching. You killed him. That's there, and it was a historical fact. Paul now is telling them in here that the Scripture said that this would happen. The Scriptures prophesied that you would turn on him and you'd kill him. Now, when you did all of that, they took him down from the tree. Why do they call the cross a tree? Well, that really isn't what it was. They would go out, and they didn't have crosses like we see today, you know, hanging around your neck, and you have these nice, shiny crosses and so forth. And when we were over there, why tourists would come along, and they wanted to walk the path where Jesus walked, and so they would carry these crosses, and they were just nice, shiny, varnished, without a splinter on them, put together, these beautiful crosses that would be a pleasure to carry. Not so. What they did was that they would go out and cut down a tree, just an old ragged tree. They didn't try to smooth it down. They didn't try to take off the bark to make the guy feel good. They wanted to heap all the paint on him they could heap. So they'd cut it off, and then they'd go out and they'd stick it in the ground. And then they would take the crossbar, which would be maybe an old crooked limb of some kind with the bark on it and all that, and then tie him on this, then lift him up and nail that on there and nail him to the cross, and he's nailed up on a tree, is what he's nailed up on. And so that's what they would call it there. So he's taken down now from the tree then. But what was it God did? God raised him from the dead. So there's our third point, see? God raised him from the dead, and he was seen for many days of them that came up with him from Galilee to Jerusalem, who are now his witnesses unto the people. So now, what was the arguments Peter made? God raised him. The prophets said he would be raised, but then what argument did he use to show that Jesus was raised? See, the witnesses. So God has witnesses here. So that's what he points out to them. And we bring you good tidings. That word means the gospel. It means good news. We bring you good news of the promise made unto the fathers. Who would these fathers be? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So now we're here today to tell you that what we're preaching is the good news of the promise God made to our fathers. We're not here to preach something different. See, what we have to understand, as we look at the gospel of Christ, there is nothing in the gospel of Christ that was not preached in the Old Testament. There's nothing there. Everything that happened in the New Testament was foretold, going to happen in the Old Testament. There were no surprises. Paul, later on, clear down at the end of here, he's going to say in there that he's not preached anything except what Moses the prophet said should come to pass. He said, that's all I preach to you. It is what they said should come to pass that is in here. Now, so that's what he's saying. Now then, here's the good news that we now have this fulfillment here of the same here that was made unto our fathers. That God hath fulfilled the same unto our children, in that he raised up Jesus, as also is written in the second Psalm. Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. And as concerning that he raised him up from the dead, now no more to see corruption, he hath spoken on this wise, I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David. Now I want to stop right here to make a technical point. Here it is. He's going down through here, and he says now, 33, God hath fulfilled the same unto our children, in that he raised up Jesus. Now, if your mind is working at all, and you are thinking even a dime's worth, you think that's talking about the resurrection, don't you? I mean, you'd be an idiot if you don't. If you say, oh, no, that's not talking about the resurrection, that's talking about something else in here, see? No, he's talking about the resurrection. See? But it's not. And you say, what do you mean it's not? Well, let me go ahead and read what else he says, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about this. Now then it says, he fulfilled the same in that he raised up Jesus, as also it is written in the second psalm. Now he's going to quote a psalm to prove he raised up Jesus. Here's what it says. Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. That's the verse that proves he raised up Jesus. Now look at the next one. And as concerning that he raised him up from the dead, then he's going to quote another verse. Now, do you see the point I'm making? There's two raises here. He raised up Jesus, and then he raised him up from the dead. All right, let's go back to the first one. When he raised up Jesus, this would be like if I were to tell you, suppose I'm teaching a history class, and I say now America was back here, and here it is, they got involved in slavery, and God raised up Abraham Lincoln for his slaves. What do I mean? Do I mean he raised him from the dead? No. I mean he had this little boy born. He grew up back there in the Midwest, and he freed the slaves. God raised him up. That's a normal way of using it. That's what he's talking about here. Now, at the proper time, God had Jesus to be born and grew up. Now, let's see what he says here about this. So back up here in verse 33, that God hath fulfilled the same in our children, in that he raised up Jesus, caused him to be born, and raised him up, as it is written in the second psalm, Thou art my son, this day have I done what to you? Begotten you. See? So when God begot Jesus in the womb of Mary, and had Jesus to be born, raised him up to die on the cross, that's what that's talking about. God brought Jesus in existence, raised him up. Now, concerning raising him from the dead, there's another psalm there he quotes, 34. And as concerning that he raised him up from the dead, now no more to return to corruption, he has spoken on this wise, I will give you the holy and sure blessings of David. Because he saith in another psalm, Thou wilt not give thy Holy One to see corruption. Well, that's the one Peter quoted in Acts 2. So now this holy and sure blessings of David, this is a promise that God made to David. God made to David that through his seed, he would raise one up to sit on his throne. Now, he didn't say, it's just like Abraham. I was preaching Sunday morning. God made Abraham a promise, and he didn't make it a promise if, did he? Through thy seed, all nations of the earth will be blessed. And then he had things to happen to make sure that did happen, even though people went into sin. Now, David, through your seed, I will raise one up that will sit on your throne. In fact, he'll sit on the throne of God. Now, that's a holy, a sure, and holy promise. See, it's going to happen. All right, you say, now, this is it. Right here, Jesus was raised from the dead to give this promise to David, because the psalm also said he would not give his Holy One to see corruption. What that means is he'll not leave him in the grave. He's going to raise him from the grave. He's not going to lay there in the grave and decay like other people. So that's a prophecy of the resurrection. Now he says in verse 36, For David, after he had in his own generation served the counsel of God, fell asleep, was laid into the fathers, and saw corruption. Now, you remember Peter used these same arguments? In other words, it sounds like David might be talking about himself, but Peter says, now, let me speak freely of you, the patriarch David. He died, and his tomb is out here with us today. See? So David's not talking about himself. That's what Paul's saying right here. Now, David, he served God in his own generation. Then he died, and he was laid to his fathers, and he saw corruption. You can go out to David's tomb and roll away the stone, walk in David's tomb, and all of a sudden there's bones. He's decayed. See? And so David's not talking about himself. So he had to be talking about someone else in here. So it says, but he whom God raised up saw no corruption. So God's talking about somebody else other than David. He's talking about the one coming out of the seed of David. He's talking about the Christ that's here. I want to make one other point right here in verse 34:6. For David, after he had in his own generation served the counsel of God. I think this is a real important verse for us to think about. David, in his own generation, served the counsel of God. Now, when David lived, David served God while he was living. Now, he's had a lot of influence since then, hadn't he? David has a lot of influence in this congregation. But do you suppose that when David was living that he thought, now, I need to write the book of Psalms, and I need to do some things so the people down in Monroe will not forget me, so they'll know who I was, see? He just served God while he was alive. That's our job. Not to try to do something great, not to try to accomplish something that 1,000 years from now will still be there, not to try to write a bunch of books so that your name will never die. It's okay to write books. But just keep this in mind. Whatever you do, you serve God in your generation. And other things will take care of themselves. Now, that's what David did. Then in verse 38 he said, Be it known unto you, therefore, brethren, that through this man is proclaimed unto you remission of sins, and by him every one that believeth is justified from all things which you could not be justified by the law of Moses. Now, all of you people have been living by the law of Moses. Could the law of Moses justify sinners? Now, the law of Moses, they offered blood sacrifices, didn't they? Every year they offered those sacrifices, and God then would put off the sins for another year. But what happens when you go to the bank and you borrow some money and you can't pay it back, and it becomes due in a year? You go up and the banker says, well, I'll renew it for another year. And then you go back in a year, you can't pay it, and you're farther in debt. And he said, well, I'll loan you another $1,000, and I'll renew this for another year. And the next year you go back and you say, I'm farther in debt, I can't pay it. Well, I'll loan you another $1,000, and I'll renew it for another year. And you do that all your life. Do you ever get that debt paid off? No. The banker, through his kindness, is letting you go year by year. That's the way it was under the law of Moses. Sins were not forgiven. They were set forward for another year. God knows that he will use Jesus to pay off those sins. That's what Paul is saying. Now, by the law of Moses, you could never get a sin washed away. But through faith in Jesus Christ, you can be justified by all of your sins. You can get them all washed away. That's there. Now, he's come down now, and he's finished the sermon right in here that we've got. Told him about remission of sins. Here's the interesting thing. At this time, Paul does something unusual. It appears he gets angry. I'm sure he doesn't. But from the appearance. Right here, he's going to turn on them. And instead of being like Peter, when they said, Men and brethren, what shall we do? Peter said, Repent and be baptized, every one of you, Now look what Paul said. Beware, therefore, lest that comes upon you which is spoken in the prophets. Behold, you despisers, and wonder and perish. For I work a work in your day, a work which ye shall no wise believe, if one declare it unto you. Sermon's over. Sets down. What a strange way to end a sermon. What a strange way. Now, this is something where you and I'd have to be there to understand this. As Paul is looking out on his audience, he's not looking at the same audience that Peter had in Acts 2, is he? He's looking at a hostile audience. He's looking at an audience out here that is looking at him, and they're not interested. They're not asking him what to do. And he can tell the way they're reacting. They're hostile to him. And so instead of him pleading, repent and be baptized, every one of you, he closes it in saying, beware therefore, lest that come upon you which is spoken in the prophets. You people out there, you better beware, or something bad is going to happen. Here's what it is. And then he quotes Habakkuk. Behold, you despisers, and wonder and perish. For I work a work in your days here that one told you wouldn't believe it. Now, he goes back and picks out an example back in the days of Habakkuk. Habakkuk lived right before God sent the country of Babylon over to conquer the Jews. And things were really bad. And Habakkuk at that time cries out to God. And he cries out to God, O Lord, this nation of Judah is so bad. We are so sinful. Why don't you do something about it? We're your people. And your people, Judah, are so bad. And you're not doing anything. And God answers Habakkuk, and he says, Habakkuk, I am working a work in your day. It is a work that is so great that if somebody told you about it, you wouldn't believe it. And what was it God was doing? You know what he went ahead and explained? I'm raising up that wicked and mean country of Chaldea. I am fortifying them with the meanest, wickedest horses you've ever seen. They have horses that are trained to just run over and trod upon human bodies. They have horses that just love to run into crowds and splash and tromp blood into the ground. They have soldiers and a king that their God is their might. And they just love to go in and just trod nations to pieces. I'm raising him up now. I'm fixing that kind of army. And they are going to come over and conquer Judah and teach Judah a lesson. And he said, if he explained this to the Jews, they wouldn't even believe it. Now he said, you people here at Antioch, you better watch out because you're going to find out you're going to be in the same situation as those Jews back there. By the way, what happened to those Jews back there when Habakkuk preached to them and Daniel preached to them and Ezekiel preached to them and all the prophets preached to them? What did they do? Nothing. Went right on in their sins. And God set that nation down and trod them to pieces. Now he said, you people here at Antioch, you better watch out because you're about to have the same thing to happen to you. I've told you, and you won't believe it. Sermon's over. Totally different way than how Peter closed it. Let's look at the next. 42. And as they went out, they besought that these words might be spoken to them the next Sabbath. People went out and said, we want to hear more. It scares us. Now, when the synagogue broke up, many of the Jews and of the devout proselytes, there's your proselytes that's there, followed Paul and Barnabas, who speaking to them urged them to continue in the grace of God. So as Paul and Barnabas left, these people came out, Jews and proselytes. They came out and said, we want to hear more. And so Paul told them more and said, here's what you need to do. Continue in this. Now there's where we're going to close tonight. Look in verse 44 where we start next week. And the next Sabbath, almost the whole city was gathered together to hear the word of God. Well, you can imagine it would be, can't you? The rumors that would be going on in there. And so everybody's together. And Paul now is going to get one more chance to preach to these people at Antioch.